Chelsea. This is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I am wearing one of my fancy BookTube hats, and I am doing a wrap-up today for what seems like a fairly arbitrary month of all of the ones I have not yet done wrap-ups for. March 2020. It was a weird month. Things started fine and got very bad. The reason I'm randomly wrapping up March 2020 today is because I have a book that is due back at the library that I want to have a physical copy of to show you that is in this wrap-up. I've had a bunch of library books for like over a year now because all of the library due dates got extended during lockdowns and they're all starting to come due again. But the book in question is actually the last book I read in the month of March, so it's gonna be the last book in this video. I'm gonna film that segment now and then return the book and film like the rest of the books in this wrap-up maybe tomorrow. It's gonna be seamless. You're not gonna notice it happened. So you know how I just said I was gonna film the rest the next day? Well, I lied because it's now several months later, and I've dressed up as if it's the same day or whatever in the same video, and it totally isn't. It's months later. I don't know who I think I'm fooling. So I'm going to tell you about the rest of the books that I read in March of last year, but it's now like several months, even longer since it was March of last year than it was when I started out this endeavor. So I promise no in-depth recollections about the specifics of these books. I'm gonna try to keep this pretty quick. The first book I have to talk about though is one that I do want to spend some time gushing about because this was a new favorite for me. It is the book of Atrix Wolf by Patricia A. McKillip. Up until I read this book, I'd read a number of McKillip's books, and the only one that was a 5-star read for me was The Bell at Sealy Head. This was also a 5-star read for me, but in a different way. This was published in 1995, and I think this would actually be a good starting point if you were interested in McKillip's writing but didn't know where to start because you'd been told that a lot of her books are very confusing. This still has a lot of very heightened fantasy concepts and the sort of writing where reality is a little bit blurred. That's typical of her work, but the plot of this is fairly straightforward, especially since it's structured where you get a prologue that tells you the thing that happened like 20 years before the main plot began, that basically the main characters spend the entire novel trying to figure out. And you were basically told what happened right at the beginning, so as a reader, you are less confused than the characters. This is a type of storytelling that I actually really enjoy, the type where you're slowly watching characters put together the pieces and discover something that you as the reader already know. I find it very satisfying. So basically in the prologue, what happens is there's this war between a kingdom and the army that is besieging the kingdom. It's been this horrible long siege. Both sides are suffering terribly. And the ancient renowned mage Atrix Wolf decides to try to intervene to bring this siege to an end in a way that he really probably shouldn't. He unleashes something terrible, which we have a better idea of what that is than he does or anyone else does, and accidentally draws in the involvement of this sort of fey otherworld. We meet the daughter of the Queen of the Forest, who is named Sorrow, spelled S-A-R-O, which is an intentional homophone for the human word S-O-R-R-O-W, which is a foreign concept to her people. Sorrow, who has a drop of human blood in her, is pulled by these magical events out of the other world that she's from and into the human world. Jump ahead 20 years, we meet one of our protagonists, Talus, who is the prince of the kingdom that was formerly besieged. He was born the night of the disastrous events of the prologue, at which point his parents both died and his older brother became king. We meet him when he's been sort of sent away to this magic school in the mountains, and I really liked the bit of introduction that we got to this magic school and a cast of characters there, and I thought I hoped that there was going to be more focus on them, but there really wasn't. We leave the magic school setting very quickly. He does encounter a magical book there, the Book of Atrix Wolf of the title, that he brings back with him when his brother calls him back home. And he is a great character and I love him. I guess that nerdy, soft, bespectacled princes are a character type that I'm very, very fond of. I want more of them. He has a very interesting and somewhat conflicted relationship with his older brother, the king, that stems from the fact that everything his brother does is motivated by his trauma from what happened when he was very young that is just not part of Talus's living memory. And Talus is really living with the specter of these events that happened before his time hanging over him. Our other protagonist is, of course, Sorrow, who is mute in the human world and has grown up working in the palace kitchens. And this is a book that has so many great descriptions of food. This is a book that will make you hungry because of all of the scenes in the kitchens. Sorrow's experience of the world is very unusual, but she has this very strong, interesting relationship with her environment. She's also sort of like enchanted, so everyone around her can kind of tell that there's something magical or unusual about her, but she doesn't draw attention. Everyone's thoughts sort of slide past her. And basically this is the story of a magical book and how Talus and Sorrow eventually discover what happened 20 years ago and who Sorrow really is. One of the things that I particularly love about McKillip's fantasy writing in general that I think is on very strong display here is how she does magical otherworlds. There is this sense in a lot of her books that I've read that, like, there are these regional pockets of other worlds tucked into various specific locations within, not the real world, because most of her books don't take place in the real world, but within the fantasy worlds that they're set in. Like how in the Changeling Sea you get sort of the sense that there is this underwater otherworld that exists off the shore of this particular island. Or in The Bell at Sealy Head, there's this other world that you can get to if you open the right doors in this particular house at the right time. In this one, the magical otherworld that we deal with is one that seems to be very local to the specific woods near this kingdom. And I think I like this vision of magical otherworlds, fae worlds, better than the sort of vision where this is the fae world. There's something about this that sort of seems to hold open the door for a lot more wonder and mystery. And it feels right somehow. It feels like different parts of the natural world might be just magical enough to spawn their own otherworldly realm. So that's the Book of Atrix Wolf. It was 5 stars. I loved it. I want to mention that I also read several graphic novels in March that I think I've already wrapped up in a separate video, so I'll link that video so you can find it. But the next book is Miranda in Milan by Katherine Duckett, which is a sort of revisionist queer sequel to The Tempest. It's a Tor.com novella, relatively short. I liked it a lot, but didn't, like, love it. I really, like, passionately adored The Tempest in my young teen years. And over time, I've come to like it less for some of the reasons that I think this is responding to pretty well. Specifically with the very weird father-daughter relationship between Miranda and Prospero. I find it more and more uncomfortable every time I revisit The Tempest how sort of badly Prospero manipulates Miranda. He just, like, magically puts her to sleep in scenes where he, like, doesn't want her to know stuff that he's talking about. And then he completely, very manipulatively masterminds her entire romance and relationship with Ferdinand. And up until a certain point, this book is absolutely the response to how weird that relationship is. That I have always wanted. So what is going on here is that this takes place after the events of The Tempest, and Prospero has brought his daughter Miranda back to Milan, where he has taken back his role as the Duke. She is waiting for word from Ferdinand in Naples that he is ready for her to join him, but that word does not come. She is waiting, and she doesn't hear from him. Meanwhile, in her father's palace, she's extremely constrained. For some reason, no one is allowed to see her face, everyone is scared of her and she has no idea why. The only person she can talk to is her lady's maid, Dorothea, who is also a sort of outsider and also doesn't know what's going on. And this ends up being a romance between Miranda and Dorothea. You know what this reminded me of? And this is a little embarrassing because I'm going to compare this to a show that I've only watched a small portion of. But at the time I read this, I had started watching the animated Disney Channel sequel series to Tangled, and I never got very far in that show. But to me, this feels very like Tangled the series, where like previously entrapped tower/island girl is like back in the real world but feeling very trapped in her parents' household. And this would be like, what if Rapunzel ditched Flynn Rider/Eugene, that guy, and like got together with Cassandra instead. And like, I know people ship that, even though there's a whole ton of that series that I haven't watched where I'm sure a bunch of important stuff happens. But like, that pairing makes sense, and it makes sense here too. Where this lost me a bit was sort of with some of the big twists that happen towards the end. There is a thing that is revealed to have happened during the timeline of the Shakespeare play that I find to be just inconsistent with any reasonable interpretation of that play. And I think it may be based on an actual textual inconsistency, but still, I do think that like, even if I'm totally ready to condemn Prospero for being a shitty father and possibly having been a terrible duke, I still wasn't quite ready to jump on board with the sort of revisionist plot that happens here. Nevertheless, I was still willing to entertain this theory about Prospero well enough to enjoy the book. I gave it 4 stars. It is fantasy. There's a bunch of magic. Prospero's a sorcerer. I don't know if I failed to mention that. Prospero is a sorcerer. But yeah, if you're interested in revisionist Shakespeare takes, I do recommend this. I gave it 4 stars. Next up is Sorcery of Thorns, a YA standalone fantasy novel by Margaret Rogerson. Yes, Margaret Rogerson. Which was nominated for the BookTube SFF Awards. I read it. I was really glad I did. It was fairly easy reading, pretty addictive, a lot of good fun. I don't remember a ton of details about it. I've pulled up the Goodreads page on my phone to try to remind me of enough things about this to be able to sum this up to you. This is about a girl named Elizabeth who lives in a kingdom that's a bit Victorian-ish, if I remember correctly. But she has grown up very separated from normal society in this kingdom because she has been raised in one of these great libraries that safeguard all of these magical books. And the magical books are like one of the reasons that I think a lot of fantasy readers are gonna want to read this book. Big magic library vibes. The books are like themselves magical artifacts that have various magical properties, and they are very, very dangerous. And Elizabeth has grown up with the understanding that the purpose of the libraries is to safeguard these books from the evil sorcerers, so that the evil sorcerers don't misuse the power of the books. She is completely lacking in the understanding that most of the kingdom does not actually consider sorcerers to be evil, that sorcerers are in fact much celebrated members of high society. And so at the beginning of this book, there is a disaster that occurs at Elizabeth's library where a magic book gets loose, turns into a monster, because like they turn into monsters when they get loose, and kills someone very important. Elizabeth acts incredibly heroically to defeat the monster, but ends up getting framed for the crime. And so she is like sent away to the capital for trial, and this very handsome, eligible sorcerer comes to collect her. She is, of course, totally certain that he's evil and is going to kill her, and that is not his intent at all. Much misunderstanding, very romance. So, like, fun misunderstanding romance shenanigans. Library girl gets introduced to high society. There's a huge conspiracy happening. The kingdom is in danger and they have to team up to solve the mystery. The sorcerers in this world get their power from making contracts with demons from this demon world, demon realm. And the relationship between Nathaniel and his demon is a source of much entertainment in the story. I am going to compare this to another show that I'm only partially familiar with. I'm terrible. But my understanding from having watched some of Black Butler is that this master-demon relationship is decidedly derivative of Black Butler in a way that's not a bad thing, it's just a thing. Like, Nathaniel's got this tragic backstory. He lives alone with his demon butler, who is perfect in every way, and he doesn't trust anyone else. Anyways, enough about that. I do think that I vaguely remember that Nathaniel is confirmed to be bisexual, and that Elizabeth's best friend back from the library is asexual. So I think this does have some queer rep in it. I think there are things about the world of this story that are sort of underdeveloped, but because it's a standalone, like, it's okay that there didn't need to be a whole ton of substance there to support this story. Like, especially with the whole existence of the demon realm. There's an element of the ending that might have been really uncomfortable if the novel had explored more of the demon realm beyond the basic idea of, like, demon realm evil bad. It's also one of these stories where you're concerned with this one kingdom and you never really learn what else there is in the world besides the one kingdom. But, like, it's a very self-contained book, and that's kind of fine. One more, like, very minor thing that I want to leave you with that did strike me a little bit about Elizabeth's character development that I found refreshing, even though it probably shouldn't be, is that we do get to a point in the story where we learn why Elizabeth is, like, especially suited for the task at hand. And I was happy that that happened in a way that didn't make her some sort of greater chosen one. Like, she's special, but not, like, that special. She is just special enough to do what needs doing. I gave this 4 stars and had way more fun remembering it to wrap it up than I thought I was going to, so there's something. And then the next book I want to talk about is another one that I gave 4 stars. Lots of 4 stars in this wrap-up. In an Absent Dream by Seanan McGuire. This is the 4th book in the Wayward Children series? Yes, this is the 4th one. It's the 2nd prequel. It follows one of the minor characters from the first book, Every Heart a Doorway, during her childhood adventures in a world known as the Goblin Market. This is beautifully written. It could be read on its own if you wanted to. That said, I was sort of hoping this would be the book in the series that would blow me away and, like, be a new favorite, and it wasn't. Possibly in part because of the mood I was in when I read it. If you've read the first book, you know something about how this story ends. You know something that goes badly and wrong. And I got to a point where I, like, had to put the book aside because I knew what was coming and I was dreading it so deeply. So I actually put aside this book for quite some time when I was very near the end, and it was weeks before I could pick it up and finish it. And part of this might be a symptom of, like, March 2020 and unpredictable emotions. But this book is about the character Lundy, who comes to be known by her last name over the course of the story. And she journeys to the Goblin Market and comes back several times over the course of her growing up. And this has to do, it centers around the events of her comings and goings, not necessarily the time she spends in the Goblin Market. You're sort of told in passing that Lundy has gone on these entire portal fantasy adventures during parts of the story that are essentially off the page. And Seanan McGuire has tinkered with the portal fantasy format quite a lot throughout this series, and I think this was a really interesting choice to focus on the comings and goings and what they mean. That said, I think if those portions of the story that didn't happen on the page had been included in the book, there could have been a full novel's worth of book here, and that this sort of pared it down to a novella. So I think what's really interesting about this book is the world of the Goblin Market itself. And the way it's presented is very focused on some sort of radical fantasy economics. The Goblin Market is a world where you have to make fair trades for everything you get, everything you receive. And the market itself magically enforces this system by penalizing you if you don't play by the rules. And it is harsh, but crucially it is also fair. No one is asked to give more than they are able to in order to survive. And if you contribute what you can to society in good faith, it is guaranteed that you will be taken care of. So I think there's some very good ideas in this. It's very eloquent, very compelling. It loses points for me because I was dreading that ending. That ending wasn't as bad, as painful as I was expecting it to be, but also I hyped it up pretty hard in my mind, so I don't know. And the last book that I want to talk about is the one I do have to return to the library. This is The Assassination of Brangwain Spurge by M.T. Anderson and Eugene Yelchin. This is a middle grade book that was released a couple years ago. I think this was 2018 release. Can I get a confirmation on that? Yeah, this was 2018. My impression is that M.T. Anderson did the text and Eugene Yelchin did the illustrations. This is a book that is told like half in picture format and half in text format, which is why I wanted to have it here to show you the pictures. Now, I picked this up at the end of March as we were in like early lockdown, and I thought, well, it is time to read this middle grade book that I've had sitting around from the library that looks like a comedic romp. I am sure that that is just what I need, the thing that I will be able to focus on, that will be escapism, and it will whisk me away from all of this. And that is not exactly what this book is. This is like sharp, pointed social satire, which I recommend it very strongly on those merits. I think more people should read this. I think this is a book that went well under the radar in terms of like adult readers on BookTube who read middle grade. And I think that this is a book that a lot of you would really like. It is, however, like a heavier, more serious book than I was anticipating it to be when I picked it up. There is comedy, but this is definitely a less silly and more serious book. This is set in a world that is kind of comparable to like the world of something like the Goblin Emperor, where there are kingdoms of elves and goblins. There's an elf kingdom and a goblin kingdom. I don't remember whether or not the book mentions that there are humans living somewhere in this world, but if they are, they don't come into the plot at all. And the Goblin Kingdom and the Elf Kingdom have these extreme cultural political differences that keep them from being able to see eye to eye. The elves, of course, think they are the pinnacle of high culture and society, and they think the goblins are absolutely terrifying and disgusting. And this is about two scholars, two historians who are supposed to be doing some diplomacy. Brangwain Spurge is the elf, and he is being sent ostensibly to give a gift, a peace offering to the ruler of the goblins, but he is actually secretly being sent to spy. He sends back like images of what he has seen, and like they are able to print them out in the elf kingdom and see what it is that he's witnessed. So the format of this is that there are two point of view characters, Brangwain Spurge and Wolfe, who is the goblin he is staying with, who is so genuinely, enthusiastically excited to have an elf visitor and have like a cultural exchange and like show him all of the best that Goblin Society has to offer. He's extremely earnest about it, and I love him a lot. So the text chapters are from Wolfe's point of view, and the chapters that are told in pictures are Spurge's. And we can presume that these are the images that he is sending back to the spy master back home. And sort of like the main gimmick, the main trick that this book pulls is the fact that Spurge's perceptions of the Goblin Society are incredibly skewed by his own prejudices, by his own racism and xenophobia. And so his depictions of what he sees are not necessarily accurate. So what you get is this dichotomy between Wolfe describing all of the amazing, wonderful things that he's trying to impress his very unimpressed guest with, and then the pictures that are like Spurge experiencing all of these absolute goblin horrors. And we do get slowly some very precise reveals that tell you exactly how much of an unreliable narrator Spurge is being here. So like I'm just gonna flip through one of these chapters so you can see what the pictures, what the art style looks like here. And it's all pictures for these chapters, no text. We also get interspersed with our two main points of view, some letters that are sent by the spy master who sent Spurge on this mission. So you get more political intrigue about what exactly is going on here with the espionage and the politics. So I think this is an incredibly clever book. I think what struck me as most unpleasant to read was just like how badly Spurge mistreats his host and like abuses his hospitality. The book does get a little more action-packed, high-stakes run for your lives in the later parts of it. I got the sense that this was sort of more catering to the perceived need for, you know, an action-packed story for younger readers than it was like necessary to talk about the things the book is really talking about. There is the really intriguing question of the Goblin Kingdom's ruler, who is not a goblin, and is in fact some sort of interdimensional being from another world or something. And the goblins are all kind of like, yes, the Great Gog is cryptic, its orders are mysterious, its purpose is unknowable, but we live with it, we go along with our lives. And I feel like there's really something to that like isn't really explored as much as some of the other themes of the book. So I don't think it's a perfect book, but I definitely think it's one that more people should read if you're interested in something with maybe, I guess, possibly comparable to Pratchett-esque satire in a heavily illustrated middle grade novel. If that sounds like your thing, I am happy to tell you that this book exists. And it looks like I forgot to film an outro, so anyways, I hope you're all having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.